The Marlins come back to win against the Nats. Xavier Edwards, a big part of that. Yes, you heard that correct. The Marlins in 2024 have found a way to come back and win a game. It feels like 2023 all over again. Eddie Cabrera on deck this evening, Friday the 13th. What are we going to get from Eddie Cabrera? Tons to get into. Today's Locked On Marlins.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England and welcome to Locked On Marlins, your daily Marlins pod. I am your host for now, Peter Pratt. Hit me up, of course, at Miami Marlins _UK. Happy Friday, guys. Happy Friday the 13th. Yes, sir. Thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. Reminder as well, there's a YouTube channel. Hit subscribe over on the YouTube channel. It's also called Locked On Marlins. So join me in the comments. Join me in the premiere as well. We premiere these episodes. So join me in the live kind of premiere and let me know your thoughts. I'll be listening, watching, tuning in. So let me know. So let's welcome onto the show, Fish on First, King of Gifts, my man, Ely Sussman. Eli, how are we doing?
Doing great. Mixed emotions, knowing this might be our last collaboration, at least in this current form on this vehicle that you've used. So I did come properly dressed for those watching on YouTube, wearing one of my Jazz t-shirts.
There we go.
This is a one of the very first ones. This is him when he was still an infielder. If you remember this,
the Jazz hands, right?
Yes, that was when wearing a COVID mask and all back in 2020. His first signature defensive play of his career more than 4 years ago. At this point, so even though he's not going to be a subject on this show, whenever I am on this show, I wanted to be a proper guest on here, Eden. I've enjoyed talking with you and, of course, listening even when I'm not on the show. So thanks a lot for bringing me on one more time.
You know it. You know it's going to be a fun episode, and I'm glad you've mentioned Jazz. Listen, Jazz is always, he doesn't have to be on the rundown. There's no need. He's always on the rundown, and so we know that for sure. Before we get into it, this episode is sponsored by our good friends over at PrizePicks. And you can go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnMLB to win $50 instantly when you play $5. The Marlins in a 4-game series. So, I mean, me and Eli were chatting about this in advance. Strange live stream for the Fish on First guys on a Thursday. So all of a sudden that opens up this spot on a Friday. So good for me, good for Eli. But Eli, game one of this 4-game series against the Nats, it's been tough for the Marlins against the Nats this year. Main takeaways from game one?
You summed it up quite well in that brief intro before, that it just felt like previous years. You could string together the previous 2 years, both 2022 and 2023. Both of those seasons, they waxed the Nats head-to-head. Yeah. Both those seasons have been a complete reversal this year, only winning one game head-to-head prior to last night when they pulled it off. And I was as skeptical as anybody. Very first inning to dig themselves down into a 3-0 hole and knowing, oh my goodness, you need to stick with Darren McCacken for better or worse, another handful of innings. Yeah. I was shocked that they were able, in the state of this pitching staff right now, to put together what was a near perfect pitching across the latter 8 innings of that entire game. I did not see that coming. And that's a very pleasant surprise. That's why they play the games and go through it. And of course, you needed the offense to do something here. And they capitalized a little bit on some subpar Nationals defense. I watching the Nets as much as I do, even when they don't play the Marlins recently, in their current construction, they're one of the youngest teams in the league. Very exciting, a lot of potential. But in their current form, especially on their infield, their defense is sloppy at this point. And you could exploit that as the Marlins did. So it was great to see. Xavier Edwards only played 2 innings of the game and yet had time to get 2 hits from each side of the plate. It's such a joy to watch him. So he has been a limited part of our lives the previous few days while nursing this vague illness. And yet when he steps on the field, he snaps right back into it. It has he's certainly been one of the bright spots of this season, turning into what looks to be a pretty significant part of their lineup moving forward.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. It was great to see. And I was completely with you because I was like, okay, X isn't in the lineup. I checked the box score in the morning. I was like, okay, Xavier Edwards looked like he had a pretty decent day. Like, it was one of the top performers, in the MLB app. And I was like, how has this happened? Has it gone like 17 innings and X has come in? No, but he basically played a couple of innings. But to your point, was impactful. A couple of things there, Eli, I want to spin off. Firstly, you mentioned the pitching staff. So let's kind of lean into that briefly. It's fair to say it's been a very interesting year and a very tough year to follow. Not just the volume of guys has been tough to follow generally, just trying to work out who the hell's on a mound. At some point, there will be a version of Guess Who. By the way, does Guess Who, is that a game in the States? Do you know what that game is? Where you have the faces on a flip thing and you put them down and up?
Yes.
Do you know that? Yeah. There'll be a Marlins edition.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sure. It's a great game. There will be a Marlins 2024 version of Guess Who. I am convinced of it, and it should be. Nevertheless, they've had a lot of guys, a lot of arms. What bright spots have you seen in this kind of collective pitching staff in 24? And which of these guys do we see like a future beyond 24, do you say?
Well, on the relief side, there have been some bright spots. The ones that stick out, certainly last night at the end of the game, a 2-inning save from Jesus Tinoco, who his numbers are staggering, what we've seen from him since he was acquired on trade deadline day, not in a trade, but just as a afterthought waiver claim to fill the shoes of one of the many vacant spots that opens up on the deadline himself. And he is doing a great impersonation of some of the better relievers that they moved. It's been awesome to see him perform as well. The combination of command that he has in addition to his swing and miss stuff, like he's checking all the boxes that you'd want, the ability to go on back-to-back days, the ability to go multiple innings as he did in this particular game. It's been extremely encouraging. The only downside is that the season's about to end, and it's always a very big question, no matter how well a reliever performs during a season or during a pocket of a season, they're so volatile year to year. So you just got to pray that he shows up in camp in February and he's the same dude and that his work in between during the offseason goes swell. If he does, then all of a sudden he's somebody that you'd actually feel comfortable with pitching high leverage innings for 2025 and beyond. What separates him from somebody that is a really established closer and somebody that you'd have trust in is simply the track record. So many pitchers can look good in flashes and for brief stretches and have everything clicking. The consistency aspect is so hard to find. So, but they checked one box in having him do what he's done so far in a variety of roles. That looks pretty good. And we should touch on this second guy from last night who did step in. I think he recorded 5 outs or so. Anthony Veneziano. Yet another waiver claim that this is one that I had no familiarity with, and I really overlooked when they added him on the roster in the first place. And he's been very impressive as well. I was not familiar with his game. I did not think that his velocity was on that same level, where he's sitting mid-90s from the left side and can actually miss bats as well with his own breaking ball. He is somebody that has more of a background as a starting pitcher. And I think more realistically, his projection was honestly, when they claimed him, he was supposed to be a glorified mop-up guy that simply is there to eat those innings. When they acquired him, I simply thought it was Kent Emanuel 2.0, a younger version of Kent Emanuel, a version that has club control. Really, from the first outing, the stuff looked a little different. And I think ever since that, excluding that outing, it's been nearly perfect performance, even if it's in lower leverage situations. What I will give Bendix credit for is seeing what they have in these available options, specifically when it comes to pitchers. Even though it's not sexy, it doesn't get anybody excited to scroll through all these relievers. You're able to learn a lot about pitchers in a very small sample because every pitch they throw is part of that data collection. If they just make a handful of appearances, then on the back ends, front office side, they can really dig into their stuff and figure out what works well and what is worth holding on to on the 40-man roster throughout the offseason. So Veneziano in particular is, I think, very quickly is now on that bubble where it's possible that he could stick around into 25, at least on the 40-man. Not necessarily. So many of these guys, unfortunately, are going to be squeezed off as soon as the season ends or as soon as some of these injured pitchers come back from the IL. And he very quickly is moving up on that bubble. So every single outing that he has down the stretch is pretty crucial to his future. I don't envy somebody being in that position and feeling that kind of pressure on them. He seems to be handling it very well so far.
Thank you for the pronunciation update, by the way. I'm pretty convinced, I'm certain that my initial pronunciation, just by as you read it, I assumed he was Italian, and you got Veneziano, which kind of like feels right.
It
But
does.
he isn't Italian, I don't think. Maybe he is. I don't even know. But Veneziano, I like that one. But to your point as well, Eli, I remember doing this show and looking at his numbers. I never heard of him before, as I haven't heard of any of these relievers before this year, predominantly. Thinking, there probably could be something here. He's performed well at the major league level for a sustained period, predominantly as a starter. And I was thinking, okay, let's see what's cooking. And he's definitely hit the ground running, which is interesting. You just mentioned just on Bendix, and by the way, what you called out there around the audition aspect here for these relievers. This is the perfect time. Me and Nick Alvarez spoke about this on yesterday's show, that I know in the grand schemes, it doesn't sound amazing that Marlins have used this like ridiculous amount of arms, but this is the perfect time to use these arms where there's no actual leverage on the games. And this is the time, like, let's see them at the big league level in teams that are competing. And it's real, like these are real at-bats, and there's, the hitters are trying to do what they want to do. And I think this is the perfect time. I'm loving what Bendix is doing from a relief perspective. Let's just see as many as we can. And let's find, if we can find one rough diamond, but multiple rough diamonds would be even better. So I'm all for this Bendix situation. But just going back to Bendix specifically, I asked this again to Nick. Where are you on the Bendix believer train at this point? I mean, everyone's had a different slew of emotions this year. Where are you on the pro Bendix scale at this point?
It's complicated. I do see. There's been a lot to digest so far, and there have been some decisions that I think are unequivocal mistakes that were made, especially earlier this year. And there have been some deals, I guess you could say recently, it feels like things that some of the decisions are a lot easier to follow and easier to accept as wins, as minor wins for the organization overall. Yeah. As much change as he's made, there's just still a lot of questions about what it's going to be like moving forward. We're just a couple weeks away from the end of the season, and what is this coaching staff going to look like? There could be a lot of changes in that regard. That he will be largely, if they do make a change at the managerial spot, then that's immediately one of the bigger decisions of his tenure so far. So what he does in that regard, whether it's making a last-ditch attempt to try to mend that bridge with Skip, or whether it's to start over, that's still a very big decision in terms of keeping him, and then deciding what to do with all the coaches, how many of them to keep around as well.
Yeah.
In last offseason, he was put in a terrible spot, and I think that's what's easier to see in hindsight. There was really nothing. There was no good ending to the 2023-2024 offseason, considering that even the vibes were good with the fan base itself. Even if they had spent more money, even if they had really gone aggressively trying to compete, it wasn't going to end well with the players that were realistically available to this team, with all the needs that they had to patch, and like most critically, with all the vulnerabilities of the farm system underneath, just the lack of organizational depth that he inherited. There was just no way to win. And even if you can certainly quibble and criticize how he went about messaging it publicly, and then the timing of that first Luis Arias trade and everything that came after that. But it was, he was put in a really difficult position, and it's taken a lot of his energy to address things behind the scenes. And at the same time, it's still going to take a lot longer to get a full understanding of what it is that he and his hires and what their entire vision is going to be, just because of the position that he was put in. All I can say is that this offseason is, in my opinion, even more crucial than the previous one, because Marlins quietly have a whole lot of payroll flexibility this offseason.
Yeah.
Even if the expectation is that this team isn't going to spend, that the 2025 season isn't all that important to them, considering where they are right now, and setting realistic expectations about where you could go from 100+ losses to the following year. There are a lot of different directions that he could take here. There's flexibility and room for, if this is a really, not just a creative, but if this is a high quality front office executive, this should be a good opportunity for them to take an interesting step forward now that he has a lot of his people in place, now that they do have a lot of that financial flexibility, even more so than they had last offseason. So the jury is very much still out on him. It does seem that he is settling into that chair a little bit as this first year has gone on. So I'll give him credit for that.
Agreed. Definitely settling in. I think there was, to your point, I think the start was a tricky start and it's improving subsequently. Maybe the pressure's off. Maybe that's what it is. It's like the release valve has gone and it's now just, this is just what he knows, rather than farm's not looking great, team's good, fan base is on a high. Ooh, this feels like a tricky spot and I'm maybe going to stand pat. I don't know. But nevertheless, it feels like he's a little bit more in the groove. I want to talk to you straight after the ads about, you mentioned Skip Schumacher. We definitely have to speak about him. We also need to speak about Mel Stottlemyre Jr. as well. So we'll talk about those guys. Equally, I want to talk about Edward Cabrera as well, because very interesting piece, very interesting player. I'm interested to get your thoughts on Eddie Cabrera, what the future holds for him, where you see his role with the Marlins or beyond. So tons to get into. Stick with us, guys. Before we do that, let's let you know about our good friends over at TonaI. Yes, sir. And this is perfect for Fridays, no doubt about it. And for those of us that thrive on getting stuff done, including workouts, every minute counts. That's why you need TonaI. It's the smart strength training system that takes the guesswork out of working out so you can make sure you're making the most of every single rep. TonaI is the world's smartest and most effective strength training system that helps get you stronger, powered by AI. TonaI learns with every rep, so it delivers workouts personalized just for you. TonaI learns from your movement and provides suggested weight recommendations for every single move with detailed progress reports. Progress maybe for you in the States, I guess. They even create personalized program and workout suggestions or recommendations based on your individual goals. It's basically like having a personal trainer at home with you, as TonaI will optimize every workout just for you. And unlike traditional gym equipment, TonaI uses adaptive digital weight to advance your training techniques. From professional athletes to the mom of three, TonaI is trusted by thousands who have become their strongest. Right now, TonaI is offering our listeners $200 off your TonaI purchase with the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's TonaI.com. And use that promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $200 off your purchase. Welcome back to Locked On Marlins with me, Peter Pratt, and Fish on First GOAT, Ely Sussman. It's Friday the 13th, guys. We are carrying this conversation. I want to talk about the offseason changes that could be coming, the offseason decisions that could be coming. I think, Eli, you've really lent into something there. What's the future for Skip? When I think of Skip Schumacher, I look to Craig Mish, and I look to what Craig Mish is talking about publicly, and he says to me, Skip's gone. That's the vibe I'm getting from Craig. Is your expectation that Skip Schumacher moves on for the Marlins this offseason?
Yes. I think it's over with Skip, and that decision was perhaps made a full year ago when once Kim Ng was gone and they brought in somebody else right there, this being the final guaranteed year of his contract. But then, as has been reported on, the conversation that was had internally about voiding that third-year option for 2025, that decision has been made. There are going to be alternatives out there potentially looking for managers, not only the White Sox. If it was only the White Sox, for example, looking for a manager out there, that would seem to be one of the only places where he'd be taking a step down.
Downgrade.
Downgrade. So now that there does seem to be better market for prospective managers, and he would be a very desirable candidate for those. It makes a lot of sense for him, and it just follows the line of thinking and the tradition that we usually see from executives when they come into a new place, the way that Bendix has. It is frustrating because I think Skip is unequivocally an effective manager. He checks so many boxes that you look for in somebody handling that position. So in this organization, if you're a fan of the Marlins through the years, there's been so much turnover, with the exception of the Don Mattingly era. Every other quarter century of Marlins baseball, it's been a constant churn of managers, even those that are really effective right there. That is somebody that has so much value within an organization and is the face of the team in a lot of aspects because of how often they're in a position to comment on the state of the organization. So to see somebody go that did that job very well in all regards, it is frustrating, but it does seem inevitable.
We're going to talk about Eddie Cabrera very soon. However, one guy that impacts Eddie Cabrera, I'm very interested to get your take on as well. You know, considering Skip Schumacher likely to move on. Talk to me about Mel Stottlemyre Jr. I haven't really spoken a ton about Mel Stottlemyre Jr. It's kind of like ticking under the radar a touch, but where's your head at with Mel and the future here with the Marlins headed into 25?
I think he has been under-discussed this year just because of how much respect people have for him. And yet he's in the middle right now of one of the worst pitching staffs the organization has ever had. So people want to be respectful of that. But at the same time, he has been credited with the successes of so many guys over this previous 5 seasons that he's been in this seat for. And now all of a sudden, when you have a staff that is fallen short of expectations, taking everything into consideration, even with all the injuries, guys have not performed very well at all. I mean, it's one of the weaker pitching staffs in all baseball on both the starting side and on the relief side. Now he's been put in an impossible situation. Peter Bendix has really not sabotaged him intentionally, but of all the members of this team that are impacted by the way that this front office has handled this season, it's been Mel Stottlemyre Jr. most of all, who's had to deal with 40-something different pitchers over the course of the season, so many of whom have arrived as waiver claims, as desperation call-ups from AAA to fill in, whether it be for an injury or somebody that just got traded, etc. Even in cases where, remember early in the season, Max Meyer gets off that great start and they take Max away from Mel. All of a sudden, well, Mel, you got to make something else work with this rotation spot because Max needs to develop his changeup in Jacksonville for however long. Right there.
I mean, he does need to develop that changeup, by the way, but whether Jacksonville was the right one, but not to take you off topic on that one.
And that's just being one example, all things considered, of a player that it's so difficult to like assign pieces of the blame pie when you have somebody like that is unquestionably underperforming this year. How much of that is the player not making the adjustments he needs to make, and how much of it is on the coaching not putting him in a position to make those changes? Without rambling too long, I would think that even though he was one of the few guys that bridged the Mattingly to Skip Schumacher era, I'm really skeptical that he's going to stick around for another managerial pairing at this point, partly because of just his style, where he is, in this day and age, he is somewhat of I wouldn't say a dinosaur. I would say that he certainly values some intangibles, the human element, the value of mechanics and pitchability more so than the data. He doesn't lean as much on the data as the majority of pitching coaches do in this day and age, not as much as Bendix does himself. So in terms of whether it's a fit for what the organization wants to preach for its pitchers moving forward, it might not be a fit. This is a little bit contingent on the manager that comes in. When Skip came in and Mel was already there, they agreed to work together. So that could be the case, but assuming that they go with a manager that is really steeped in analytics and in lockstep with the front office, Mel might not be a great fit for that moving forward. But just going back to your original point, he has been under-discussed this year just because I think people have a lot of respect for him. And so many pitchers that have come through this organization do owe a great deal of debt to him. Sandy being the most obvious example of a pitcher that became matured so much during his years under Mel's tutelage, whether that be during the regular season or even in spring training. Just the interactions that he can have with prospects during the course of spring training for the guys that get invited there, that matters too. There's so many anecdotes I could bring up, and it's been a really good tenure for Mel overall. But I do think his tenure is winding down as well.
Me too. I completely agree on both of those. One final one, then we're going to hit the final ads, and then we're going to talk about Eddie Cabrera. GM. There's no GM at this point. Do we think, I know Bendix is Pobo and thus kind of operating as such, but do you get the sense that a GM will be appointed this offseason as well? I mean, at some point, like, there's so much to do here. Like, it feels like, that role needs to be filled, I think. And I think probably they fill it this offseason. What about you?
That is my educated guess as well, whether that comes from promoting one of the remaining assistant GMs. But at this point, it's just Gabe Kapler and Brian Chadden among the internal candidates. But the complication of Bendix taking over this job when he did over the course of the offseason is the relationships that he may have had with Rays executives. Some of those people were not available to him last offseason. Like, they had existing contracts with their organization that, even as much as they may have wanted to work with Peter, they couldn't leave for comparable roles with the Marlins if they were already on the Rays. So whether it is going back to that specific organization or just other candidates that he was very interested in originally that were already locked in with their particular teams for 2024, I imagine that he'll try to revisit those opportunities as well. So I would not rule out the possibility that they bring in yet another executive from the outside that was on their radar already, just wasn't available at that moment. One interesting dynamic is, it varies a little bit with each organization, but with some, the GM is more the public voice than the POBO is. Even if the president is the one that has the ultimate authority, the GM can handle some of the public relations and take that off his plate and kind of speak on behalf of everybody. Certainly in the initial availabilities that Bendix did with the public, those did not really come across well. Like, I didn't feel that his communication style wasn't transparent with fans.
It wasn't that.
And it generally just was not inspiring in any particular way. That is an aspect of the job of the front office. Even if your job is not to sell tickets directly, it means a lot to actually have buy-in from your fan base and to take little steps. There is a skill involved with communicating in such a way that you're able to get people to understand, if nothing else, just to understand what it is that your plan is. And I think even to this point, Bendix has not been all that effective in getting people to understand what he's trying to do. That would be perhaps one of the side benefits of bringing in, either elevating one of the assistant GMs or bringing in somebody else that would be able to, that has that skill more so than he does.
It's a great call out, Eli, as well. Like, the GM becomes more of the media engagement person, right? Like, they become more of the voice, or can at least take a chunk of that responsibility. And I think, to your point, it's just been it was a bit of a rocky start, let's say, with Bendix, with the media and the fans, etc. It's just the mixed messages aspect to it. And I think it feels political. It's too political in its approach, where you just don't believe what's being said. And I think that's a really bad position to be in. I think the fan base wants to trust. And I think it got off with a bit of like distrust there in what was being said and what was actually happening. So a challenge, but I think I can see a GM being appointed. I think it's going to be Gabe Kapler. I think I spoke about it a few maybe weeks back or a month back, maybe, that I think Gabe Kapler is going to step into that role. Feels like he's been pretty effective in getting like a realignment within this kind of minor league setup, but I think Gabe might kind of transition into that role. We'll see. Running long, but nevertheless, we've got time. It's Friday, and I've still got half a glass of wine, so we're all good. I'm going to hit the ad, and then let's come back and talk about Eddie Cabrera, because this is one of the most volatile players I think there's maybe ever been in baseball, to be honest with you. So I'm looking forward to digging into his future with Eli. Before we do that, let's let you know about our good friends over at PrizePicks. And PrizePicks, of course, is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And it is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's you against the numbers. No sharks. Don't have to worry about them sharks. It's you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in, baby. And you can, of course, win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. Yes, 4 correct picks can 100 times your dough. And it's the best way to get in on the sports action in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. So simply download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's it. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks and get $50 instantly when you play 5. You don't have to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks. Run your game. Final segment here on Friday's episode of Locked On Marlins and me, Peter Pratt and Ely Sussman. Ely, talk to me about Eddie Cabrera. He's been probably one of the most discussed players on this podcast, I think, in the 3 years I've hosted this show. There's ups, there's downs, there's ups, there's downs. I never quite know what Eddie Cabrera we're going to get. I don't think any fan does. I think we now just constantly watch the games in expectation of a one-inning blow-up with a leadoff walk, with a bloop single and another walk, and next thing is he's out the game, or he's got the old teapot look on his face like, holy moly, how did I give up that home run? So where are you at with Eddie Cabrera at this point, Eli, and what does his future look like here? He's going this evening. He's coming off a good start, which is encouraging. Kind of looking a bit further ahead, I think, than this evening. Like, what does Eddie Cabrera look like moving forwards here?
There were, entering this year, there were some pretty heavy rumors about him being discussed as a trade candidate, in particular with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And not that I would wish for somebody to go to Pittsburgh if they don't want to go to Pittsburgh and live there. But I was, I kind of rooting a little bit for a trade to happen just so that, the conversation, the discourse about him might dissipate and go away, just because it is exhausting to go back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah, it is.
And it's exhausting partially to his credit, because there are moments where he looks incredible, where he looks unhittable.
Yeah.
We're talking at a time where he's coming off arguably his best start of the entire season against the Phillies, where he was efficient and he put up zeros and worked all the way into the 7th inning. He has made a recent adjustment that has me intrigued. I don't want to say that it's totally won me over one way or the other, but he is doing something. It's not always the same. There is a plan, it seems, that recently, Eddie being one of the hardest throwers on the team or of any major league starting pitcher, he's throwing his hardest pitch more. He's throwing his fastball a lot more in recent starts than he has at any other point in the past few years. And that is something I feel is significant and important to the success of any starting pitcher. Now, it has been his worst pitch this year. If you actually dig into the numbers, he allows a lot of home runs. He gets hit very hard. He doesn't get very many strikeouts when he throws his fastball directly. It's about the whole picture, and it's about having your pitches complement each other, sequencing them in such a way that you're ultimately able to get out. If he can throw his fastball without it getting hit very hard, and he can throw it in locations specifically up in the strike zone, it allows the rest of his pitches to play off of that very well. From the moment he came up, just to put some numbers behind it, during that first appearance in the big leagues back in 2021, he was throwing his fastball barely a quarter of the time. It was 23 to 25% of the time. That is just unheard of low figure for a starting pitcher in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
And it has not really changed all that much during the couple of years since then. All the hype has been about his changeup. Well, it's the hardest changeup in baseball, and he has become infatuated with it at times. And he does have even the additional stuff that he has, his curveball and his slider, and are like, there's a lot to like here, and there's a lot of toys for him to potentially use. Ultimately, if you are able to throw 99 miles per hour, there's a big advantage to being able to do that. And it's something that he has, for whatever reason, not really leaned into during the course of his career. He's been doing it more recently, where the fastball is now his most used pitch, throwing it 35 to 40% of the time instead of 23 to 25. It's a significant difference. And as long as he doesn't get burned by that pitch, he's able to change eye levels more effectively against the hitters that he's facing, give them more to think about. And that has me really encouraged right here. Regardless, there's going to be a lot to think about after the season ends in terms of how he fits in, because he's out of minor league options. They have all these pitchers potentially coming back from injury in 2025 that create this big crowd in the rotation. And then overall this year, you can just look at the numbers. He has not been all that good this year as a whole. He's been a slightly below average starting pitcher for somebody that we've now seen this very big sample of. On top of everything else, it's been the recurring injuries that I don't think it's reasonable to bet on those just magically going away in the future. He's somebody that, for whatever variety of reasons, just can't stay on the field and available to your team that often, even compared to a regular pitcher. So he is such a complicated case.
Yeah,
He's
he is.
creating a good problem that he's finishing this year off so well. Really, if you zoom out and look over the past 6 or 7 starts, it's been a sub-3 ERA during that span. He's been effective recently. He's still relatively young. It's exhausting how many factors you have to consider
There's
here.
a lot.
But yeah, it is ultimately a good problem to have, and I'm very eager to see how he does these final couple starts of 2024.
Yeah, great call out, by the way, Eli. And I got to be honest, that when you start talking about that, it reminded me of Trevor Rogers, to be honest with you, where I think back to Trevor's heyday, the 2021 campaign where he was just excellent. And I just always remember thinking about Trevor, like the fastball up in the zone, like it was a pitch that worked. And then the changeup worked off that so well. And the fastball was effective and missed bats. And then the changeup was equally effective. And that's a really good call out, like for Eddie, that, yes, when you've got the box of tricks, but you still need a fastball, a high gasolina fastball. Everything hangs off that. And I think that's kind of Max Meyer's problem, frankly, where his fastball isn't what it needs to be. Thus, the box of tricks doesn't hang off it either, right? I think it does start there, and I think it's encouraging. It's a really good call out. So I'm going to be super closely watching to see what he does with this fastball usage moving forwards, because, like, why not use it? I know it's not been his best pitch or whatever, and like you said, everyone gets a little bit oversexed, let's say, on the 97-mile-an-hour changeup or whatever it might be. But, I think it's a really good call out generally. Where do you see him next year? To be honest with you, if this change, last 7 starts, 3-ish ERA, if that's what we're getting from Eddie on league minimum in 25, then listen, he's in the rotation. He's going to be given an opportunity. Well, he'll be in the rotation, no minor league options, so there's no decision to make, right? So I think if Eddie finishes strong, there's that option. Equally, Bendix tried to move him last offseason. Do they maybe look to revisit that? I think maybe this offseason.
Considering when people show you, well, not directly, but now that we've learned that they were seriously shopping him a year ago, I think that is a pretty strong indication that his status is not safe moving forward, and that they will inevitably listen moving forward. Ultimately, it depends on what the offers are and how the rest of the league values him. I feel there is a certain price where they would be willing to move on from him if they're able to get something substantial in return. If not, then I think the most likely outcome is that he winds up in the bullpen with this team. For as much as we've been delighted by a few of these waiver wire guys, whether it's Tinoco or Veneziano, even John McMillan before his injury, this bullpen still has so many question marks, so many unproven guys. And I think it'd be naive to think that these waiver wire pickups are going to be able to fully replicate all the veterans that they traded away right there. There's going to be room. There's going to be competition for high leverage spots, even though it's something that Cabrera has never done before. This is a pretty classic trajectory of a player. If they're not ultimately cut out for starting duty, especially if there's somebody that has durability concerns, one way to limit that injury risk is to have you pitch fewer innings, at a time, and potentially to go to the bullpen in order to do that. I think he'll be a very good reliever if he does make that transition. I think there's still value to the team if he's in that particular role. So I think that is the most likely outcome. He has made it just very frustratingly interesting by performing well. He's created a good problem where you can't completely rule him out as being a rotation piece or a factor in that conversation moving forward. I do think the most likely outcome is reliever, just to preserve his health and to really lean into the nastiness of his stuff.
I like it. So many potential outcomes, permutations is how I'm going to describe it for Eddie Cabrera this offseason. Very interested to see what happens. One final one, Eli, then we'll get out of here. Get the crystal ball out. We're in 2024 now. Not the season the Marlins were hoping. The rebuild is in full swing. Tell me the next year the next year that the Marlins are in the postseason? What year will that fall in your opinion?
I'll be on the heavy pessimistic side right here.
Uh-oh.
Say 2029.
Oh boy.
How's that? A totally unrecognizable group from the ones currently in this organization.
Okay.
Well, not totally, I should say. A lot of the players that they've acquired, the prospects that they've acquired would still be right in the midst of their team-controlled years right there. There's a lot of competition for the near-term future in the National League that they're dealing with right now.
Yeah.
So while it's possible, I'm sure they're going to try to compete before then.
Yeah.
You also just need to look back at this franchise's history. They've only made it to the playoffs 4 times in their entire history, only 3 times over the course of an entire season.
Yeah.
So given that history, and we haven't even mentioned his name, but Bruce Sherman is ultimately the one that has the biggest influence on this organization as the owner. There's not been anything specific from him about that makes you feel like his spending is going to increase significantly in the years to come.
No.
And that's always going to be a significant disadvantage. Even if Bendix was part of an organization in the Rays that was able to overcome a low spending ownership, it's not necessarily that there's no way to, like, that's not a preference. That's not the way that you ideally want to go about things. That is a disadvantage no matter however you slice it, and how many of the right people that are brought in order to find sustainable solutions for this. The goal that I think Bendix has talked about is being able to consistently compete for the postseason, and they will get there sooner rather than later. In terms of actually breaking through and making it, certain things need to go right, and I just feel that for the moment it's still far enough away. There's only so many guys you could point to as definitely part of a contending team moving forward. So I will just set the expectations as low as possible and hope that they surprise me.
2029, final one, because we are long, but it's my show, so I can do what I want. 2029, the Marlins make the postseason finally. Thomas White is in the Cy Young conversation that year. Yes or no?
He's potentially he will be a big part if they are to make that. He will be an absolutely crucial part to what they're building right now. I have been deep in reviewing this past minor league season, and Thomas White was, for us at Fish on First, clearly the top dog in this Marlins farm system. And looking back on it, only reinforces that. Really special player, specifically as a left-handed pitcher. You could argue that he's just one of the very best left-handed pitching prospects the franchise has ever had. It's that kind of talent, such a successful year that he's had. He will be ready. He will be entrenched in the big leagues by then. And how old will Thomas White be? Only 24? All those years later, he'll still be on that early side of his trajectory. So that is one of the guys in this organization that is a keeper, somebody to build around.
Let's bookmark this episode, baby. I mean, this is the beautiful thing of YouTube and, podcasting. It's evergreen, right? So, Eli, when we're a little bit older, a little bit grayer, maybe, we can reflect back on this and go, remember when Eli said 2029 Thomas White, Cy Young? There we go. It's going to be here. Guys, we're going to call it a day there. Eli, thank you so much for joining me on Friday on Locked On Marlins. It probably will be our last conversation via this. Did you say vehicle? Is that how you described it earlier? I can't even recall, but I appreciate you. I thought that was a stunning episode. And as always, Ely Sussman, absolutely on fire. Guys, thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. Back tomorrow. Delighted to welcome onto the show Marlins Radio, Steven Strom. So we'll have Steven Strom on the show tomorrow, which will be fun. He's joining us from Washington, so that should be fun as well. So we'll see what kind of backdrop, I guess, he's got and what kind of crowd noise is going on. But nevertheless, Steven Strom on the show tomorrow. We continue to roll out the guests here on Locked On Marlins in the last couple of weeks. But we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks again to Eli, and see you tomorrow.